Hello, welcome to a very special Benzinga virtual event, BioTech Companies to Watch. I am your host, Tony Noto. We're about to do a live Q&A with Michael Yurkowsky, the CEO of H-CYTE. But first, I want to give a big shout out to our partners, The Daily Hunt. They provide all the news and content that's fit to read and stream in multiple languages to billions of people across India. They use machine learning, they use AI, all to inform, enrich, and entertain. So thank you to Daily Hunt for sponsoring this program. And let's begin. Folks, there's a lot to be said about biotech, big pharma, and medical device industry. Why is it important? Well, it's because it concerns people's health. We want to know whether investment dollars will yield results and how they can ultimately save lives. But it's an awkward time. Companies tend to be overvalued. Market caps are plummeting. Financing is difficult to secure, to say the least. And when funding is secured, the chances of success are extremely low, especially in that critical phase 1 trial. But in the business of drug development, M&A can be key to scientific breakthroughs. And you know the big names. Eli Lilly, Novartis, both did $1 billion plus deals in the past few weeks. Dice Therapeutics was bought for 2.4. Chinook Therapeutics was bought for 3.2. And there are plenty of other companies looking for deals, but whether those deals can get done remains to be seen, as the current market is dubious, to say the least. Many of today's most influential medicines might not have gotten made without M&A players like Michael Yurkowsky, who's going to be our guest in just a few seconds. And over the past few years, pharmaceutical M&A hit record highs as larger companies turned again and again to young biotechs for innovation, like H-CYTE. So without further ado, let's bring on Michael. He's an M&A pro who has more than 2.5 decades of finance experience. He's been on the buy side, he's been on the sell side, and now he's at the helm of H-CYTE, which has 4 innovative medical devices in its portfolio. Michael, is he here?
Hi, Tony. How are you?
Good, Michael. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
No problem. It's a pleasure. You were one of the early investors in NantQuest. We spoke about that in an earlier conversation, one of the largest biotech IPOs in history. Yeah. And now you're at H-CYTE, and we're going to get started. But first off, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
Now, I teed off by talking about M&A because it's something that is so critical for medical devices to get made and even make it to market. Sure. And H-CYTE did quite a bit of M&A in the past 8 months or so. It picked up Jantibody and Skin Disc. Correct. So I thought, why don't we tee off talking about those 2 deals?
Sure. Again, thanks for having me, Tony. Really, I took over. I was a board member at H-CYTE. The company was operating clinics using PRP to treat COPD. That's platelet-rich plasma. It's kind of reinfusing stem cells, if you're familiar with that. And they were actually very successful in the process, but the clinics were not profitable. So as a board member, I could kind of see this trend happening, even though the procedure was very effective. The fact that the clinics wouldn't operate profitably because there was no FDA approval, they were using a exemption, cell therapy exemption, to be able to use the process. So we tried to figure out, we have a public company, we have a vehicle, and how do we best try to monetize this or create shareholder value? So that's kind of when we pivoted to the concept of creating an incubator. Through my past relationships with you that you kind of talked about with a lot of the major hospitals, we have access to a lot of innovative novel science. Okay. And talking to a couple of my friends who are bankers, again, from my previous finance life, we decided that there was opportunity to raise money around the concept of an incubator and create this. Now, what also prompted this, as I was talking about the clinics, H-CYTE, which is the centrifuge company that we used to spin down the blood for the PRP for COPD, they saw the benefit of the treatments that we had to almost 8,000 patients. They agreed, and through our CSO, Tanya Rhodes, she kind of came up with this idea of, she has a lot of history in medical device and 510Ks and wound healing, which I'll get to with the skin disc discussion. H-CYTE agreed to file the 510K for us to make our treatment with PRP for COPD into a device. And they would pay for it. They would get the approval. Then we would have some Medicare healthcare reimbursement, make it more accessible to patients. And we would have a licensing model. So that was kind of the first step in the iteration in that.
Okay.
So that's in the process of being done. Again, H-CYTE will bear all the costs of that. Once we get approved, we will have exclusive rights to that, and just literally it'll be a licensing model. There's a lot of interest from pulmonologists for that. But to get back to your point, the two acquisitions we made, we felt would be complementary. And what we're looking for in acquisitions really are short windows to either monetization, where we can go and market these, or short window to value inflection, where we could either partner the project or sell it to big pharma. So the first one was Skin Disc. It's a wound healing product. It was developed by Dr. Brock Lydon. He's a podiatrist in Ohio.
Talk a little bit about Brock, because I know when we spoke about him, I was just fascinated by his ability to treat patients who were on the verge of losing limbs.
Yeah.
It was so scary, that conversation. But you said that it was a complete success, that no one lost any limbs.
Yeah, and again, kind of skipping around here, but what I look for, and as you mentioned, my primary business is kind of private equity in the biotech medtech space.
Yeah.
So when I look at it strictly from an investment perspective, it's always better when you find a doctor who is trying to find a solution for patients. So kind of going from the bedside to the bench, as opposed to a scientist who's working from the bench going to the bedside. So Dr. Lydon, he was trying to find a solution for his patients. He treats a lot of diabetic wounds, non-healing wounds, chronic wounds that will not heal. And a lot of times there was no solution. So through the practice of medicine to try to treat his patients, he found this solution. And it's an autologous treatment, meaning patient specific.
Okay.
It's a bone marrow aspirate along with some other things. And he effectively creates a jelly blob. For lack of a better word, just to simplify.
What does it look like? I'm imagining like flubber, or what does it look like?
It's again, bone marrow aspirate, PRP, a couple of other things, and it literally creates a malleable blob of material, wow, which he uses to pack in the wound. It gets perfect, complete, attachment to the wound. And there was obviously trial and error in this process, but he figured out a way to heal these wounds. Again, he's a specialist in this field. He's very world-renowned. He's on a lot of boards, speaks at a lot of conferences on wound healing. And through, again, the trial and error process, once he developed this skin disc process, he has treated over 500 patients with this process who were facing amputation and healed all of the wounds, usually with one treatment. No one got amputated with this process. Amazing. And all the wounds healed. It's really remarkable. And again, he found this just because he was trying to find a solution for patients. So people from all around the country and world send patients to him. And, they eventually put this process into a company, Scion. We acquired Scion for the skin disc process. And we're going to file a 510K using retrospective data, not prospective. Now, we are going to do some prospective work. We're going to use his process, go to an IRB, because he's going to continue to treat patients.
Mhm.
But we want to get the 510K, commercialize this, and then similarly license it out. So with those type of results, we believe it will be fairly easy to get an approval. And then we will, again, license the kit to create the skin disc to other wound healing centers, other podiatrists. And it's really exciting. It will be very inexpensive from this point forward for us to develop it, a few $100,000, really just writing expenses, filing expenses, things like that. And then we'll have to create a little bit of a sales team to go out and market it. But we anticipate revenue sometime in late 24, maybe early 25, because it will take about 9 months to get the approval.
Now, we spoke a little bit earlier about your relationship with hospitals. What are some of those hospitals, and why is that so key to success in the biotech space?
So through some of our previous investment activities, through my family office, we have done investments with Mayo, MGH, which again, we didn't necessarily touch on Jantibody yet, but we can get back to that. MGH, which is the Harvard, Mass General Hospital in the Harvard system, the Fred Hutch in Seattle. So we've invested with several of these institutions. So we know a lot of the doctors. As a matter of fact, whenever we do due diligence on any of these products or processes, we have access to all of these hospitals. But also, when they are, when they have some new innovations or some novel science, we have the ability to be able to look at that and decide if we want to license it in. We have good working relationships with all these innovation departments at the hospitals. And, it's their job to be able to spin this out to commercialize the science, right? That's how these hospitals make their money. They also want to get it to patients, right? They want to be able to get this creative, novel science that can help patient care. So we've done 2 or 3 deals out of MGH. We've done a couple out of Mayo. We've done one big one out of the Hutch, and we see probably 30 or 40 deals a month. So it's not as if we, invest in every deal, but from the innovative or from the H-CYTE incubator perspective, it's very useful to have these relationships because, ideally, in my mind, as I see it, we can create things that are synergistic to the portfolio, or to want to, if there's ever something that, specifically Jantibody has shown very good efficacy with a lot of these PD-1, anti-PD-1 and, checkpoint inhibitors.
Yeah.
So if we ever see any opportunity to be able to find something that would be useful in combination, ideally in my mind, we would bring it in to make some of these products more effective. So
yeah, that's a good way to transition to Jantibody, because when we last spoke about it, I was so fascinated by the tech and the idea of harnessing the host immune system. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think as we move forward in science, and again, I'm not a doctor. I rely on our doctors quite a bit,
Right.
But I have a pretty fundamental understanding of how these things work. And, if you look at standard of care now, it's much better than it was 30 or 40 years ago. But I think ultimately we want to move away from things like chemo, which is very toxic on the system, obviously. Again, it saves a lot of lives, but I think there are better ways, which is why people have been moving towards cell therapy and immunotherapy. I'm sure, those are very familiar terms to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, cell therapy using living drugs like exogenous NK cells, or a lot of people have probably heard about CAR Ts. Those are using, cells, or engineering our cells to be able to treat and target specific cancers. But ultimately, the goal is to do something allogeneic that can be, off the shelf, universal, or ultimately, you hear things like conversation about in vivo vaccination or in vivo cell therapy,
right,
where you're actually activating the host immune system, the person's immune system, to be able to target the specific cancer. That's specifically what Jantibody does. It's a preclinical asset, but there have been a lot of cancer models and animal tests where it has shown that it activates T cells, NK cells, and macrophages to be able to target specific cancers. It's also interesting that Jantibody is a fusion protein. Basically just means it's two proteins, or either an antibody or a gene put together, and you have a specific target that, the three that we're looking at initially with Jantibody are ovarian, pancreatic, and mesothelioma.
Okay.
The surface protein on the surface of these cancers is mesothelin. We're using a mesothelin target. It's, again, Jantibody is modular. You can plug in whatever type of target you want, and it will find that mesothelin receptor and direct those cells to that target. So it's truly targeting. It's like a warhead that has a target on it.
Right.
And you're activating the host immune system instead of putting these other chemicals which kill all kinds of cells. You're putting very specific targets, and you're strictly attacking the surface protein on the cancers. So that's, in a simplistic version, what Jantibody does.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and as I mentioned, these first three are orphan indications, huge unmet need, but we could put a different receptor on there, a different part protein, a different antibody that would target other surface proteins and other cancers.
Now, you said that chemotherapy, again, in an earlier conversation, you referred to it as draconian. And that it's a strong word, but actually, if you really read up on the side effects that come with chemotherapy, it's so harsh. Is something like the treatment that you're talking about, does it come with any side effects?
Not that we have seen so far. It's very safe. It's very specific. And we've seen no adverse effects. Again, we haven't gone into humans yet, but from what we see, I'd say that the concern that you would have, just looking at it logically, is that you would overactivate the immune system, right? Sometimes you have, some of these targeted therapies hyperactivate the immune system. You get something called cytokine response syndrome, an overactivated immune system, or you could have, graft versus host or something like that, where it truly attacks it. But we haven't seen that yet because it's very specific. This fusion protein is strictly targeting the mesothelin receptor, and it has not shown any toxicity at all. Again, very early animal models, but those type of things we have not seen.
Let's pivot back to M&A. I said, there were a bunch of high-profile deals that were announced just in the past month. Eli Lilly and Dice, Novartis and Chinook.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about Devera Therapeutics and Coeptis.
Yeah.
What are some of the M&A trends that you're noticing? And I mean, you're an old M&A vet.
Yeah.
I don't mean old, of course, but M&A veteran for sure.
I am what I am, right? We all get there. I think this is one of those times, and you mentioned earlier about valuation and the depression, let's call it, in the biotech market. We saw the highest of highs by the end of 21, and I think the trend has been down because all of that money was raised. A lot of these companies there were high profile IPOs, massive valuations, a lot of capital raised, and a lot of capital spent with not much return or not much result really from the clinical aspect.
Right.
And as in the markets, most of the time you see the elasticity of moves, right? The high highs usually are followed by low lows or conversely. So I think we're in a period now where valuations have not just come back to reality, they've gone way below of what is fair value. A lot of these companies are trading below cash, and there is some innovative science out there. So I think if you're a big pharma, this is the time for you to go out and acquire things. You're going to be able to acquire things at deeply discounted valuations, and it makes sense to be able to go in now. you always want to be able to strike while the iron's hot, or when there's blood in the water, you attack, right? So I think those are the times that you really look for the opportunities. And I think there will be more opportunities. We have been approached several times with some of our other portfolio companies, with public companies who have busted science or have an enormous amount of cash, who are looking to acquire assets. And I think that trend will continue. There were something like 75 companies on the NASDAQ that were trading below cash. And, they're all looking for other things to augment their portfolio, or looking to be optimistic or opportunistic, excuse me.
Right. If you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about the H-CYTE process. I know that you said you were looking for that. The ultimate goal is to appeal to a larger biotech.
Yeah.
I would love to know how active the sale process is at this point. And does
it would,
a company like you go out there and try to find buyers yourself, since you have brokered and advised so many deals in your own right?
Yeah, and I think it's not that we would look to sell all of H-CYTE, but specific with Jantibody, we would look to get proof of concept in the phase 1 and then partner that asset. There have been conversations in the past with some big pharma companies about combination therapy trials, and there is some art to this, right? You have to wait. You want to wait for the right time to partner. So I think, if I look at that asset specifically, I could probably partner it now, but I'd like to wait until we get useful phase 1 human data to maximize the value. But, in true incubator fashion, I don't know that I would want to, unless the data was so compelling, I don't know that I'd want to run a phase 2 trial before I partnered the asset. I'd like to get proof of concept, partner the asset. I don't want to be, and I think this is one of the challenges with biotech now, they spend so much money,
Right.
and there's no foreseeable revenue in a lot of these models. Again, what we're doing is a little different. We expect some revenue in 24 and some meaningful revenue in 25.
Yeah.
But most of them will actually have some revenue in the end of 23, but it will be de minimis. But so I think, like with Skin Disc, there are a lot of device companies that would probably find this pretty appealing. So, once we get approval, we start to see some traction with sales. I think what we would look to do is monetize these assets. But the whole time, we're also looking to be opportunistic. As I said, we're going to continually be looking at adding new assets to the portfolio.
When you talk about spending, and you see a situation like Nkarta, which just today is on the move down over 5%. And they lost a lot of shareholder value over the past year. When you look at a situation like that, is that like a lesson on what not to do? Or do you sort of not blame them for being in that situation because it's kind of like a across the industry sort of thing?
I think these companies get intoxicated with the idea of what they have. It's great to have a huge balance sheet, but if you're spending, and I don't know Nkarta's last 12 months specifically, but if you're spending $150 or $200 million a year, they built a manufacturing facility if they went public before they actually were manufacturing the product.
Right.
Sure, they'd done some test runs and proof of concept and
Is
got
that
all that worked out.
Sort of like they set the table for tomorrow and not rather than cook for the meal they're cooking today?
Yeah, and I think that's, I appreciate that value of that asset. Controlling your own manufacturing is incredibly valuable. But if you're not even in the clinic, I think it's premature to spend that type of money. Again, I don't want to speak negatively about any specific company. I think the street has grown a little tired of that type of spending. And, you have all of these big name companies. Sana raised $1 billion at $1 billion pre-money, when they in their first round. They've got incredible track records, all of the management there. If we could do it, we'd do it, right?
Yeah.
Money is very challenging to raise, especially now, as you know. So I just think I would prefer, from my perspective, to be more diligent with the money. and be more focused on how to run these clinical trials and these programs a little bit less expensive, because you go down the road of raising $300 million, then you have to go back into the market, raise another $150 million. These things are incredibly dilutive to shareholders.
Yeah.
And cancer trials are expensive, right? It's $100,000 a patient. Just roughly, that's kind of the benchmark everyone uses. So I think that's the new trend, is to try to be more frugal and more diligent with the money, because it's, as I said, it's hard to raise money. And Carter went public at, I think, 25.
Yeah.
If they have to raise, and they will have to raise money again at some point, what's the stock at, 5 or 6 now? Again, not to pick on Nkarta. I don't have any specific problem with them. I just think it's challenging to shareholders. The whole goal of this, and I have a unique perspective because I'm usually on the other side of the table, right? I'm the investor, and I'm an investor in H-CYTE. We look to maximize shareholder value. Not that they don't, but I just think we have a different eye on it because of our background.
Yeah, and I don't see it as picking on these companies, but I definitely want your perspective, because you're so you're in it. And
Sure.
When you look at a situation like Fate Therapeutics, they're coming with a lot more scrutiny, because it doesn't seem like the decisions, at least from a glance, doesn't seem to boost shareholder value. They canceled the deal with Johnson & Johnson, and now they're in the midst of a lawsuit. There was a lot of layoffs earlier this year. I don't know if the two are connected, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think Fate is a little bit of a different animal, because they use iPSCs to be able to that's their cell population. So I think it's kind of, they had this deal with Janssen, which is part of Johnson & Johnson, to fund their program. I think they put maybe $4 billion into it, and then they canceled the program. It's shown there's a little bit of a difference there, right? Because their starting material is an engineered cell, induced pluripotent stem cells. So their functionality, they engineered their cells to even get started. And then you have to engineer them to specifically target them. So I think, they have a couple of different issues that could potentially be harming their ability to continue. But it was an $18 billion market cap. There was a lot of excitement around that.
A lot of excitement, right?
Yeah, and it was, I don't know, $120 a share. So it's fallen dramatically. They still have some money. They'll still be able to continue, but I don't know what the future is. And I think that's put into doubt this iPSC movement. I'm definitely a much bigger fan of the people who use cord blood. It's a natural starting source. You don't have to engineer it to get started. So I think, when you look at it from that perspective, it's, Fate has a couple of different issues.
Yeah. Market cap now at about 549 million.
Yeah. So that's a massive decline. Again, it was probably overvalued at the height, but I don't know where they will go. The people in the industry have definitely started to cool on iPSCs.
Right.
There are a couple of different problems with that we can get into. At another time.
Right. It's down over 5% today. But I'm interested in hearing your thoughts as a CEO. You were a broker, a banker, a hedge fund manager, and now you're in the role of CEO. What's your approach to leading?
I think it's different, right? When I see a lot of these, again, doctors who found companies, and they're focused on the scientific goal, which is obviously important. But a lot of times they're not the best managers. They're not the best managers of people. And I think you have to have a cohesive relationship with the doctors, but you also have to kind of coach them along to the point where you're working to a commercial end. What you don't want to have, and what you end up having a lot of times with biotechs, are gee whiz type of science projects, right? So, I can't tell you how many times I've sat with doctors and they've said, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing! Look what we can do. We can."
Right.
Yeah. grow X and heal that. And my question
They
is
come
always,
across more as pitchmen, is what you're saying.
well, and
I
I think they're excited doctors. I don't think there's anything, wrong with them being passionate about their science. But if there's no commercial end to it, then what's the point? If you doing cool things in the lab is fine, but when you're dealing with investment dollars, you have to find a commercial end, right? There has to be an out, for lack of a better term, to all of that science. Again, as we talked about before, it's expensive, it takes time, and we, the investor community, are looking for returns. We're looking for, and I think with biotech is kind of unique because there's also kind of a noble approach to it, right? You're trying to save lives. You're trying to find therapeutics that make people's lives better. And, anyone who invests in biotech, obviously we all want to make money, but you also want to do good. And I think those two things, they have to intersect. So, and it's challenging sometimes. And if you can't find the right doctor or scientific team, it's CSO, Chief Scientific Officer, Scientific Advisory Board, commercialization people, you have to be able to have that, a little blend of all of it.
Well, now let's go into that. We talked a little bit about Dr. Brock Linden. Fascinating story there, but you have wonderful connections with a lot of other brilliant minds. Let's talk a little bit about who's on your team. Anyone looking at this video right now, they want to know who you're working with and whether or not those doctors are worthwhile.
Sure. So I'll talk about the Jantibody team first. Dr. Mark Poznansky, is a doctor at Harvard at MGH. He runs a vaccine immunotherapy center. Doctor in that center, Dr. Jeff Gelfand, is actually the founder of Jantibody. I mentioned ovarian cancer. He developed this during the time when his wife was battling ovarian cancer. Unfortunately, he didn't get it to clinic in time and she lost her life. But these are brilliant doctors who are looking to, it's not just this project, right? The VIC, Vaccine Immunotherapy Center at MGH, spins out a lot of novel science. And we actually, through my family office, invested in another asset focused on diabetes out of the VIC. And we've worked with Poznansky and MGH quite a bit, and they're wonderful doctors. As far as H-CYTE goes, we've got a strong scientific advisory board that we're going to be announcing in the next couple of weeks. Our CSO, Dr. Tanya Rhodes, she has a lot of experience in getting both therapeutics, biologics, and devices through. She has a wound healing background, but she was also C-suite with a lot of major device companies. So she has a lot of commercialization experience as well as scientific knowledge. So
the bench is deep.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying the talent on the bench is deep. It's a deep bench.
It is. And again, once we announce the SAB, you will notice the depth with which we are going to be able to have experts in the field. And again, in that incubator model, I don't want to have a huge, broad, C-suite or scientific suite. I want to be able to leverage the SAB with experts in the field of the therapeutics and devices that we're trying to bring to market now. Obviously, as we bring on new assets, we'll try to bring in new people, but I think that'll be an efficient way for us to have all of the knowledge that we need to be able to advance these things, design the trials properly,
right,
without spending, $10 million a quarter.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that, because I would love to keep you for another 10 minutes. 10 minutes, is that okay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
With spending, why won't that be an issue with H-CYTE? You seem to be pretty confident that a lot of the funds that you can be profitable relatively quickly, and that products can get brought to market without breaking the bank and falling into the same swamp as Nkarta.
Yeah, I think what we're looking for are things that don't have big budgets. Now, again, We're going to try to, with Jantibody, because that's going to be the most expensive clinical asset we have. It maybe will cost us $3 to $4 million to get through our phase 1 trial. We're going to try to run a hybrid investigator-initiated study leveraging MGH. We're going to hold the IND, but we're going to leverage the assets and the experience with this project at MGH to try to reduce costs. Instead of going to a CRO and spending exorbitant amounts of money for a phase 1 proof of concept study. I think, with the devices we have, because we're able to do retrospective data and use them as devices, it shouldn't cost us as much money. But that's kind of the mantra that we're going with. We don't want to spend enormous amounts of money. As it stands now, our burn is a little bit over $100,000 a month. It's relatively modest. Now, we are out raising money and facing the same challenges that everyone else is. It's not easy to raise money now.
Right.
Our ultimate goal is to get back to NASDAQ. We're interviewing bankers right now to discuss uplisting back to NASDAQ, which will make fundraising a lot easier. But I never want this burn to get to the point where it's unmanageable, right? I never want us to get to a point, like I said, where we're spending $10 million a quarter. I just don't think I'm never going to, unless it were an unusual circumstance that we felt we couldn't pass up. I just can't ever envision us getting to that point.
Who are your investment advisors?
So we haven't retained a bank yet. We've talked to several, but we have not officially retained an investment bank.
Is there anybody you would like to work with in particular? Is there like an iBank who's just BioTech is just their strong suit versus their competitors?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, I'd love to work with JP Morgan, but I don't think that's feasible at this point, right? But I have a lot of relationships because of my past. So
right.
we've spoken with a lot of people. And I think the challenge is, I would love to work with those guys, but JP Morgan's not going to pick up their pencil to raise $10 million, right? It's just not worth their time or dedicating resources. So I think we're going to go with ideally a mid-tier bank that focuses on that space, and we think can be, the most useful to us. And ideally, we want a partner that we can, we're not just looking to do one deal, especially if we look to make some other acquisitions. We may need additional financing in the future, and I think those are the things we're looking to build a relationship for years to come.
Right. What I want to ask 2 more questions, and I think then we'll sign off. First, and I wanted to see, this is more of a general industry question. There's been a big debate over the past few years about why drug discovery is becoming slower and more expensive over time, despite improvements in technology. I think there was just an interesting trend that they got to market so much quicker and easier back in the day, whereas now it's almost daunting how many roadblocks are in the way.
I think the regulatory environment has changed. There's a lot more scrutiny. And I think that really, I can appreciate the FDA's position and, what they're trying to do, but it has become a lot more challenging. For a while over the past, let's say 12 to 18 months, the rate of approvals was down substantially. I don't know the exact numbers, but there were not many drugs approved or therapeutics approved in 21 or 22. So I would say the regulatory environment is more challenging. The cost of trials has gone up. So I don't exactly know why that trend happened. But overregulation is part of it. I just don't know. I'm not the person to really opine on how to manage the balance between appropriate regulation and overregulation.
Right.
But I can appreciate the problem, which is why you have to try to be creative into how you run these trials, especially when it comes to early stage assets, right? You want to try to be as creative as possible.
Yeah.
I've one of our other companies. I work with a doctor who is incredibly creative, Dr. Colleen Delaney. She is the CSO and scientific founder of Devera. She is unbelievable at creating these, hybrid investigator-initiated trials and managing costs. And I think I've learned a lot from her. That's a good path to go, and it's a way to try to manage expenses in your early stages.
A lot of talk is made on the campaign trails leading into 2024 about a whole list of talking points, but not a lot on pharma, except with, I want to say, one candidate, RFK Jr. Do your ears perk up when you hear candidates talk about big pharma and biotech, or do you sort of just roll your eyes and because they're not in the space?
I roll my eyes a lot at politicians nowadays, no matter who they are. But it's very popular and it's kind of in vogue with them to be able to talk about drug costs and cost to patients. And again, if it ends up costing you $100,000 a patient for an oncology drug and you have to run 500-600 patients, there's an expense to that it's a pass-through expense. You can't ask these companies to spend $300 million on development of a drug and then not recoup that cost. I mean, it's just, this is a for-profit industry. So I know a lot of people talk about trying to put a cap on prices of drugs. I'm not privy to all the balance sheets of these companies or the budgets at what it costs to develop the drugs, but I trust these people. There's a balance between wanting to make money and recoup their investment, and they aren't in the business of trying to gouge people. I mean, there are certain circumstances in any business where that happens. So I'm not really too concerned about that happening or impacting the ability to be able to get these drugs through approval.
Last question. H-CYTE might not be H-CYTE in the next couple of weeks. Talk to us a little bit about the rebranding, and what is the company that you will be CEO of?
So we are changing the name to Innoveren Scientific, Innoveren, really just to rebrand the company to reflect a little bit more of the incubator model. Innoveren is a Dutch word for innovation. I think that's really what we want to the message we want to try to get across. It has been approved, or it's in the process of being approved by FINRA, so I would expect it to happen in the next couple of days, maybe in the next 7 days, and then soon after we'll have a new symbol. But it really just reflects the change in kind of the mantra and the goal and the end game of what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, I want to thank you for the time you devoted to the Benzinga Nation today. This was a fascinating conversation, and I want to do a follow-up because I think that there are a lot of M&A deals to come, and I would love to get your perspective when those deals are inked.
Absolutely, Tony. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time. It was good to talk to you, and I'm happy to be available whenever you want to talk again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thanks, Tony.
That about wraps it up. Thank you all for joining us today. Visit benzinga.com, click around, and join us next time for our virtual events. We plan on having them as often as possible. And if I'm your host, I will be happy to bring you as many guests as possible. Have a great day.